Suffering and evil constitute the greatest problem that any of us have when facing these questions. And one can understand the reaction of many people when they observe cruelty, violence, suffering, evil, and say, well, I can't possibly believe in a God. And I can understand that. And I must say, as a Christian, it constitutes a major problem. And it would seem that in one sense atheism has solved the problem. That's just the way the universe is. It's surprising anything goes right. It's just basically amoral, blind, purposeless, and so on. Well, yes, there is a sense in which atheism does solve the intellectual problem. But we have to notice that it doesn't take away the suffering. That's the first thing. And secondly, we notice that it leaves no hope whatsoever. Now, of course, that may well be the situation, and we've got to face it. So the equation looks a bit like this. The atheist believes that the intellectual problem is solved. It just means there's no God, and then it makes sense, although it's horrific. For the Christian who believes in God, by definition, it constitutes a major problem. But the Christian will argue that what the Christian has is hope in the face of suffering. Now, the atheist has no hope because death is the end by definition. So there's no hope of compensation, there's no hope of justice, there's no hope of anything to balance out the suffering that people have experienced. But the Christian does believe that such a hope exists. And it seems to me that one of the ways into this question, and I put it that way advisedly because there are no simplistic solutions to this question. One of the ways into it is to look at what the New Testament tells us about the nature of God. And if the Christian story is true, and I believe it to be true, Jesus Christ was God incarnate. And we all know, of course, that he was crucified. Now, if this is God, then we have to ask ourselves what this means. And one of the things that I think it means very clearly is that God has not remained distant from our human suffering, but has become part of it. In other words, the question then boils down to, do we have enough reason to trust God when suffering looms large or evil is there and so on? Is there enough evidence to trust God with it? The tragedy, it seems to me, of atheism is that we find ourselves to be moral beings, yet atheism doesn't give any justification for our morality in the sense that there is no ultimate justice. If death is the end, and if a person has had a horrible life of suffering and pain, and death is the end, then there's no hope of any kind of compensation. Whereas, as a Christian, I believe that God is a God of love, and therefore there is to be ultimate justice. And that is going to be guaranteed by the fact that life exists after death, and there is to be a judgment where God will sort everything out perfectly fairly. And therefore, as a God of love, I believe that there will be real compensation for the sufferings that have been innocently endured. So, to sum this up, atheism appears to solve the problem, but it doesn't. It leaves the suffering. And it could be argued that it makes it worse because now there's no hope. Very often human experience tells us that when we're in a situation where there is suffering and pain to be endured, if there's hope to be placed alongside it, it gives us some help to endure and face it. But if you remove all hope, as atheism does, then you have a very bleak universe indeed. Now, of course, the atheists will say, well, the universe is just like that, it's bleak. But then I would want to come back on the fact that where does the evidence point? Does the evidence point to their solution? Or is there sufficient evidence, as I believe there is, to come to the conclusion that Jesus Christ really is God, and that therefore his suffering on the cross in a very real way opens the door to profound answers to this question?